about what we're about to do and why we do it. And it dawned on me this morning that certainly for the freshmen, but also for the sophomores, this is a first-time experience. We were unable to do the walk last year, so for half the school, this is a new activity. And as you know, our nation will be commemorating September 11th, and there'll be lots of events around the country, as it's the 15th anniversary. And with the NFL gearing up for Sunday, there'll be all kinds of tributes. And they'll be well done, I'm sure, and they'll be moving. But we're blessed here as a school to have a unique tribute and to the victims of 9/11. So I was here at the time, and just as I came over, a student asked me, what's going to happen when none of the students were born before September 11th? What's going to happen when none of the teachers here weren't here when it happened? And I don't know. I fear it will become just a thing that exists in a textbook. But for those of us that were at PCA that day, it will never be that thing in a textbook. So the morning progressed, and we learned that the first plane that hit flew out of Logan Airport. And it was a plane that was bound from Boston to LA. And of course, long after we realized a plane like that was specifically targeted because it was just jam-packed with fuel and it had spent very little of it between Boston and New York and would be therefore more explosive. And I remember Deb White, who was the admin assistant, Mrs. Cummings' job at the time, saying, "Tom McGinnis flies that route." And I still remember thinking, okay, what are the odds that a PCA parent, a couple kids in the school, Jen and Tommy, what are the odds, of all places in the world, that this would somehow be one of us that would be touched by this thing? And, a series of phone calls were made, and we talked to Mrs. McGinnis, Cheryl McGinnis, and she didn't know. She knew Tom was flying that day. She knew what his route was. So there was cause for concern, but nothing kind of officially had been done yet. You can imagine what the school was going through at this time, realizing, okay, we've got two kids in the school that are thinking right now, my dad was on that plane, and we don't know if he was or he wasn't. So we tried to comfort those kids, and then the rest of the student body was kind of going haywire. So this is not a time where kids were able to check smartphones and get news, right? So there's a lot of misinformation. Even the journalists were giving us a lot of misinformation. As the morning progressed, you realized the Pentagon was hit. Eventually a plane down in Pennsylvania. And then we heard rumors of attacks in other places. At one point we thought that the US Capitol was hit in the White House. And so it was clear we were under attack. Didn't know by whom and for what purposes. So at one point, and this is the part of the story that is tough, we got a phone call from Cheryl, and she said, American Airlines reps are on the way to our house. And they don't come to you personally with good news, right? So we knew. So in the years that followed, Cheryl set up a McGinnis scholarship for the school for a student, usually one who met certain criteria, in terms of their Christian faith and some other things. Helped and had to have some financial need as well. And in the beginning years, we did this walk, and we had sponsors, and these were kids that knew the family, and we were raking in a significant amount of money. But over time, that petered out a little bit, as kids didn't know who the McGinnises were. The scholarship still exists, and it's still funded. And we walk today not so much to raise money, but just as a sign of remembrance. And I know in 5-10 years, there'll be, kids here who have no clue what the story was. They'll come to this and hear a little bit about it, and it may or may not mean anything to them. And in 15, 20, 30 years down the road, none of the teachers will be here that were there then. And people say, what is the McGinnis Walk? And well, we have a document, and it says, this is what's happened historically. But for the time being, there's a lot of us that were here that morning and remember exactly what we went through. I was never happier to see my kids than the September 11th afternoon when I got home, I'll tell you that much. So I'm going to open in prayer, and I'm going to ask Mr. Rogers to come forward here and share with you some of the logistics for the walk and what we'll be doing. Father, we thank you for this day, and I thank you for the McGinnis family. And as rough and hard as that experience was, Father, you have worked all things together for your purposes in that family. It's truly miraculous to see, Father. And I thank you for Jen and Tommy and the lives that they're leading now and how you bless them and their families. And I pray for our walk today that you'll keep us safe out there. I pray that it will be a positive event for all involved. In Christ's name, amen.